The era of gaming back in the late 80s and early 90s is generally credited as being the golden age of video games, especially console gaming in the home. And that title is earned if for no other reason than that was the era that gave us the juggernaut that was the Nintendo Entertainment System. You almost can't talk enough about Nintendo's influence and how it still dictates the industry to this day. And while I'll always love that ugly, square, yellow, VHS-inspired brick of a system as my first love, sometimes it's not your first love that really brings out the best in you. The Sony Playstation had released worldwide by 1995, but in my corner of the world, this lovely corner of America down here where, I kid you not, we would always get any new electronics or toys in our stores like a year or two later than the rest of the globe would. It really didn't seem real until 1997 or 1998, when the PlayStation library of games became undeniably diverse and rich, taking the concepts of old and allowing them the space to evolve. It's a time that I'm always willing to go back to and play as a lifelong gamer. And I can't be the only one. While the indie scene has brought back the 8-bit and 16-bit style into the modern era to the point that even Square Enix is trying to cash in, looking hard at you, Octopath Traveler. Other companies are turning to the late 90s to see what all should be brought to the 2020s. We already have the Crash Insane trilogy, but as of writing, both Spyro and Medieval are slated to get similar reworkings. And who knows what else could be around the corner. It makes me really nostalgic for the 5th generation of consoles, and it was in this frame of mind I rediscovered the PlayStation Interactive Sampler CDs. The PlayStation Interactive Sampler series was a series of discs that had nothing but demos and other promotional material on them, originally meant for store kiosk, where customers could try the hardware out before purchasing. Store kiosks are a rarity now and not really a thing. I know Sony claims there are PS4 ones hanging around somewhere, but I've never seen them. Not really needed either, since our consoles can just download demos directly, but for the time, this was the best way to get an idea of how games played. Somewhere down the line, Sony started packaging them in the consoles themselves, so if you bought a new Sony PlayStation, you could have a disc all your own reminding you of the games you didn't get with it. It seems that most people my age had Volume 8 packaged in their consoles, to the point that nostalgia has driven up the price of that particular disc, but the one I had with mine was Volume 9. Volume 9 was released to stores for kiosk display in late 1997, but was in stores for several years afterwards. It reportedly didn't come with the console, replacing Volume 8 until early 1999, after several of the 16 games it promoted had become old hat, or undeniable masterpieces depending on if you're talking about Metal Gear Solid or not. It's a unique look into those years of gaming on the PlayStation. I can't think of a better way to review a time in gaming properly than to look at all of what Sony was advertising. So let's look over 16 demos for 16 games and see just what was hot back 20 years ago on the PlayStation 1. Crash Bandicoot Warped is probably still the most well-known game that's on this sampler, along with Metal Gear Solid and maybe Spyro. The original 2 games in the franchise had been out so long and were so well known that the Crash 3 demo elected to showcase one of the new levels for the character Coco, making it not necessarily a good representation of the game it's trying to sell. But if you were a gamer back then, you already knew what classic Crash was about and wanted to taste what a new playable character meant for the series. This demo delivered. Midnight Run is probably the most fondly remembered level of the whole game, and it's still a blast to play it today. The original 32-bit version is a touch easier than its PS4 remake was, but either way you can't go wrong. Fun demo, represents the game enough for the time, would buy the game again, if I didn't already do it before. Twice. Medieval was one of the British-produced comedic PlayStation games that we used to get quite a few of back when, but has sadly become less of a thing. I can't claim to have played the actual game as a kid, because this was one of the games I passed up so I could afford to buy like the 100th Army Men sequel. Don't judge me, if you were my age at the time, you sacrificed getting something for those games just like everyone else. But even the demo makes it clear that this is coming from a completely different place design-wise from the Japanese-produced games that we were so used to seeing on Nintendo. The gameplay consists of running around levels that are a little smaller than they look, using a pretty well-aged control scheme that actually uses the L3 button. Wow, that was a rarity back on the PlayStation 1, and a camera that never seems to be where you want it to be. I kept instinctively trying to adjust the camera with the right stick, but it isn't mapped there, and that feels weird in 2018 land. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, Medieval is getting a PS4 remake, so while a game whose demo implies that it evolves around finding a key for the door to get to another area to find another key for another door, isn't a game that sticks out in my mind as an all-time PlayStation classic, seems enough people disagree to the point that this is getting a comeback before Bushido Blade. I can't hate on that though. The demo was fun, and even though I never cared much for the Halloween spooky stuff aesthetic the game is gunning for, I see the appeal. It's a good demo, seems to represent what I remember seeing of the actual game. We'll probably check out the PS4 remake when it releases. Spyro was a big deal when it was first announced as sort of a continuation of trends set by Crash Bandicoot, but took Crash's limited hallway running and opened it up to what we could only describe at the time as open world. Fallout 4 this is not though. By today's standards, the levels are pretty tamed. This was still considered a pretty big deal even in a post-Mario 64 world though. The demo, while lacking some items and voice lines, showcases the best of what made Spyro appealing in the first place. Fun controls, great music, a lot of spunk, and gliding mechanics that you couldn't get anywhere else, even if aiming in the air was kind of a bitch most of the time. I don't know how the level size and the game's overly collectathon nature, and the fact that the water insta-kills you, are going to sit with modern gamers' sensibilities. The game really does seem like a product of the time, but with the remake around the corner, it won't be long before we see how it holds up. Good demo, represents the game well, would recommend to a Crash fan. Ridge Racer might be remembered as the PlayStation racing game now, but back then, if you only had one racing game, it was Gran Turismo. Or the store was sold out and your mom brought you Test Drive 4 instead. But seriously, Gran Turismo was a huge deal when it first released, as the most realistic car simulator ever up to that point, and possibly of all time if we ignore it has sequels. The demo lacks the simulation mode and any customization that the games are remembered for, instead letting you pick between two cars and doing 2 laps around a simple course to the sound of engines roaring and nothing else. Still, the gameplay holds up well and the graphics are still impressive for the hardware. It was really easy for us to fill in the gaps in our minds and visualize that we were racing real cars. Yeah, okay, so 20 years of graphical improvement has robbed today's gamers of that magic, but I still stand that tech-wise, Gran Turismo has earned its reputation. Standard demo fare, sells the game short of what it actually offers. Probably recommend the sequels over the first though. The PlayStation actually had a pretty beefy selection of Disney video games, but the first well-known one was A Bug's Life. This game looks like a basic movie cash-in, but it actually turned out to be a fun little 3D puzzle platformer. The game centered around collecting tokens gave you the ability to change seats into different planets that had different abilities, from simply bouncing to climbing to giving power-ups. New abilities opened new areas with their own collectibles and abilities. It was actually pretty fun. The demo was released well before the game was finished and lacks the game's proper menus and voice acting, and this initial level looks straight up better and boring than it did in the actual game. The goal is also right there, and if you didn't realize there were rewards for nabbing all the collectibles, you would just speedrun the game by accident. Like, check this out. Yeah, so that's quick. But take your time and try to get everything, and you can see the game was a pretty laid-back puzzle collectathon. The actual game got really challenging at parts and was well suited for those who love doing 100% runs in their games. It might have been a shameless cash-in for Disney, but I can't bring myself to hate this game. The developers did put a lot of work into it. Substandard Demo Fare sells the game short of what it actually offers. You'd have to want to play this type of game for it to be really fun, though. And you'd also would want to have to listen to Flick talk all the time, which this demo does not prepare you for. Cool Borders 3 was the one game I asked my dad to get when he got a PlayStation for the first time. In the end, I got way more mileage out of Bushido Blade and Metal Gear Solid. But it's hard for me to not get a good old dose of nostalgia when I think of Cool Borders. Everyone in my neighborhood played these games, and it always takes me back. Sadly, even I can see the series hasn't aged that well. The controls are noticeably more stiff than what they look like, and are so close to being like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater without actually being the controls from Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, that you really just wish they had used those instead. Or that you were just playing Tony Hawk's Pro Skater instead. The demo is a level straight from the game and does its job without overcomplicating the appeal. Standard Demo Fare represents the game well, would recommend Tony Hawk's Pro Skater over this now. Rest in peace, 989 Sports. EA has all but scrubbed your name out of the history books, 1984 style. But you were a great alternative to them back in the 90s and early 2000s. My brother loved the 989 Sports games and preferred Game Day over Madden back when, so I had the chance to play all of these. Game Day 99 was about when the time sports games were trying to be realistic with season modes and faithful playbooks, but still had the speed and feel of an arcade title. It's the perfect middle ground between NFL Blitz and Madden Put Your Name Here. The demo actually supports up to 8 players, which is cool, although no kiosk on Mother Earth had 8 controllers. And lets you play a single quarter, which was just enough to let you taste what the game was like. Not much to add here, it's a football title, and chances are you either already have a new Madden or couldn't care less. Standard demo with 8 player support, which is really cool. Represents the game faithfully. Couldn't really recommend this in 2018. RallyCross used to be a series that you heard more about, but time is taking its toll, and it's more a familiar sounding name than anything else. RallyCross 2 in particular was like if you took all the precision needed to play Gran Turismo, but applied it to a physics engine that did not work. You could tell by the footage that I'm having a double over time playing this without flipping my car over, and it's always been that way, even when I was playing the game as a kid. I did not own the game for the PlayStation 1, but I actually played a lot of the Nintendo 64 cart when I was younger. I remember having an easier time, so I think the demo itself is just kinda wonky, but I still rather play any of the system's other racing games. Still, in a world where racetracks tended to be flat most of the time, having a racing game all about bumps and jumps was nice, whether or not it was actually fun to control. Standard Demo Fare paints the actual game in a bad light. I still don't recommend this. The original Tomb Raider trilogy was such a huge deal upon release that YouTubers are still making videos about it, and there's little introduction to the game or Lara Croft that I could give that wouldn't borderline be a straight up repeat to you, your friends, or your own grandmother. Tomb Raider was a cultural landmark, and I don't even know why Sony thought we needed a demo before deciding if we wanted to buy the game. The only thing stopping you from getting the new Tomb Raider game was your mother saying it was too adult for you. Tomb Raider 3 was the most polished of the original PlayStation titles, but it's still a product of the 90s and all the drawbacks that implies. Controls seem good on paper, but the combination of Resident Evil tank controls along with a dynamically moving camera do not work nearly as well as you might remember. Hit detection from shooting enemies, to picking up items, to trying to walk out of this hallway. What the hell's happening right now? Is a special kind of aggravation that takes 10 to 20 minutes to fully get over. But soon enough, you go from flailing around to actually feeling like a fabulous ninja skilled explorer trying to escape tomb jail. The demo is very unclear on what it wants you to accomplish, and it's possible to get stuck without a way to progress. You can see here, I'm just stuck in this room with no idea how to progress or how to get out. At least I can do the Cupid Shuffle. Aw yeah. Drawbacks aside, playing this made me want to play the original game again. I'll stand by that the reboots are great games that are a little bit more fun to go back to, but you can't really replace the older titles. Confusing, but effective demo. Showcases the exploration aspect of the game well enough. Games may not hold up that well, but it's still a fun return for longtime fans. Of all the games on this sampler disc, Wild 9 is the forgotten PlayStation title. I wasn't ever drawn to this title when I used to play this sampler as a kid, and I don't remember ever seeing it in stores growing up. No one I knew owned this, or talked about it at all, which in hindsight is weird because it involved the team behind Earthworm Jim, and that kinda shows. The game is a 2D platformer with this weird lightning grapple mechanic that allows you to toss about your enemies and swing on stuff to reach new platforms. It's just fast-paced enough to be engaging without turning into a Metal Slug game, and the stuff you're allowed to do is generally pretty neat. Sound effects range from cartoony bangs and yelps to generally disturbing screams of pain. As fun as this was to play through, the game is so edgy I think it might be banned in Canada due to safety reasons. It's literally the part of the 90s that has aged the worst. Still, if you want the side-view Crash Bandicoot levels with a lot more action and screaming, this seems like a good time for the $3 on Amazon right now. Wow, like, shit, you might as well give it a go. The demo's so fun I actually ordered my own copy after playing. Hopefully, it represents the game well. We'll be playing this on the channel in the future. As an aside, the one thing I like about this demo is that you can actually pick hard mode, which is nice. A lot of demos don't let you pick difficulty. The one thing I didn't like about this demo was that they blatantly call out Mario 64. Don't do that. You will never be Mario 64. Bust-A-Move is a puzzle game series that's probably more well remembered for not being Tetris than it is for being an actually enjoyable puzzle game. The gameplay is a little more involved than the standard match 3 of a kind concept that you see in Bejeweled and 90% of all other puzzle games, but that's what makes it one of my favorite titles, even over most versions of Tetris. One thing that sticks out is how long the demo takes to load, and if that gets on your nerves, the actual game takes longer. The demo also lacks 2-player mode, which was the best aspect of the game, and even lacks the game's instructions? Really? Why? Why couldn't I read this? Past that, if you've never played Bust-A-Move and wanted to see how it handled, this does represent what you would be buying. Standard demo fare, even if lacking 2 players. Excellent showcase of the classic gameplay. technical issues that the games tended to have aside, I would recommend this in the same breath as Tetris and Magical Drop. It's in bad form to take a hard stand on what the absolute best game of any console was, when players' taste and preferences vary as wildly as they tend to do, but if I had to make my pick for the PlayStation, it would be Metal Gear Solid, no contest. This is the perfect example of the PlayStation taking concepts of old and allowing them to evolve to the next stage. The MGS series sorta gets a bad reputation for becoming too melodramatic and convoluted, but the first Solid title avoided going too far down that road and is surprisingly self-contained for the series. You don't need to have played the previous Metal Gear games to understand anything, and you don't need the sequels to fill in any of the gaps. This game tells a complete story. The demo is the infamous Sean Baker demo, named because David Hayter used that as a pseudonym to try and sidestep the Actors Guild. That's an ordeal too detailed to really get into here, but in the end, most of the actors still ended up having to use fake names in the final product. It's kinda shitty considering the work conditions they reportedly weathered to make the dub as good as it is. The demo covers the first 20 minutes or so of the game up to the DARPA chief and features a surprising amount of the voiced codec calls. Everything from the core story to the optional character Natasha, to even Miller suggesting tactics that are straight up not possible for the player to do.
First, put your weight on the opposite foot that you're going to step with. Then, take a step so that your heel makes contact with the ground first. Then, as you slowly lower the tip of your foot to the floor, gradually shift your weight onto that foot. Use your knees to maintain the subtle balance. Try it. I can't do it. Another way is to wear your socks over your shoes.
The game also includes some late game items for you to mess around with. The Nikita rocket launcher would have straight up broke the game had you been able to get it this early. But boy, if it isn't fun to mess around with in this demo. Check it out. Boom! Gotcha, bitch! Fuck that camera! Oh my god. This is amazing. I don't want to gush here. I really need to give Metal Gear Solid its own video in the future, since it's a very important title to me. But I do feel good saying it's a great game, and the demo does it justice. A beefy demo with a lot of content. Represents the game faithfully. I can't recommend Metal Gear Solid enough.
I've always liked reading literature from both sides. Kinda keeps me in touch. I'll share some more quotes with you if you like.
I'm looking forward to it. But to tell you the truth, I'd like to learn more about you.
Well, I'll think about it.
Twisted Metal is a series that people claim they still love, but nobody really brings up or plays much anymore. That's credited to the last few games released being subpar, but honestly, the older titles are some of the worst aged games the console has, outside of Army Man or Cloud Strife's character model. This sampler was released before Twisted Metal 3 was really in a showable state, and thus we only get a short gameplay trailer with the absolute worst audio mixing they could do while still being paid. Listen to this. The Brondo E Bombs World videos sound better than this does. Like with Gran Turismo, the graphics here did not look that bad for the time, and in memory were a lot better than what we're seeing here. But they still seem mismatched to the crazy over-the-top violence the games had. Still, I see the appeal and why you would want to go back to play these. Trailer is pretty trash, somehow does not entice me to care about explosions, and I can't personally go back to these titles today. Another gameplay trailer that has pretty bad audio mixing, but this time there's no defending the product it's trying to sell us. This is a Rugrats PS1 game, and unlike A Bug's Life, this is exactly the cash-in product you remember it being. That said, I actually did play this when it launched because my baby brother was the right age, and let's face it, when Rugrats first premiered on Nickelodeon back in like 92 and 93, I myself was that right age, so I have a history with the show. No shame. The game was comprised of simple, easy 3D environments that retold the first season's worth of episodes, with a nice collection of mini-games thrown in. Except chasing the goose for Grandpa's teeth. That stage can go to hell, that goose can burn in it. Still, don't let me trick you into thinking this was a decent game, because it truly wasn't. You do not want to go back and try to relive this one. Trailer at least lets you know the exact mess you were buying into. It's Rugrats, so your interests will vary. It's also Rugrats, so don't actually get it. No, seriously, rest in peace 989 Sports. For a good stretch of time, you could do no wrong. Face Off was 989's hockey series that might have always been overshadowed by EA's even back in the day. Hell, there are still tournaments for EA's NHL 94. Look into it. They're huge. But it was a fun hockey game in its own right, even if the controls were anything but simple. Wow, look at this. The demo lets you play a single period, and in the pause menu, you can enable controller support for up to 8 players. You can even change teams mid-match if you really wanted to. That's kinda cool. Engine worked great, and it's still funny that you get to watch the Zamboni smooth out the entire rink with a rockin' soundtrack that is so 90s, I thought my face would grow its own pair of sunshades. Standard demo fare with 8-player support. Plays exactly like the actual game. It's still an old hockey game though, kinda hard to recommend. In a Just and Wretches world, this game would need even less of an introduction than Tomb Raider does. Back when the PlayStation was current, I heard nothing but high praise for the game, even if the only reason people first bought it was for that sweet, sweet Final Fantasy VIII demo. I guess it's unfair to say that this game has aged as well as Final Fantasy, though, as the pun humor was pretty bad even back then, and Musashi slips and slides a little too much for the platforming required to truly feel right. Still, stealing your foe's abilities was an awesome mechanic that had more to do with the core gameplay than even Mega Man tended to do, and the game had a lot of character that you can't help but to enjoy. The demo has 3 difficulties that place you at different parts of the game. Scene 1 has you running down the tower and fighting the Steam Knight, which is a really cool battle if for no other reason than because you're allowed to immediately get him backing up and start throwing him through the walls like a boss. Musashi keeping his pan strong. Scene 2 is closer to the core gameplay as you climb a mountain and realize that you can slide off ledges a little too easily. Scene 3 is a dungeon gauntlet that's legitimately tough to do, but does have this awesome bowling power. Some of the game's biggest faults are not present in this demo, however, such as the annoying day-to-night cycle that is more of a pain in the ass than Majora's Mask ever was. And it doesn't showcase anything as bad as the Steamwood section of the game. That part is awful. But in that regard, it's an excellent demo that showcases the reasons you would want to go back and play this today. Age and design faults aside, I wish Square would do something with this series again. An excellent, content-rich demo. Scenes taken straight from the game. Would recommend this if you enjoy bad puns. And action RPGs. But mostly bad puns.
Hey, you forgot something! That's what you get when you try to mess with me! Look, I almost forgot. I wonder where that idiot root trip took the princess.
And guys, that was it. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you've had as much fun looking back as I did. This channel primarily does Let's Plays and short gag videos related to gaming, but I do plan on producing a series focusing on PlayStation 1 titles. Subscribe and click the bell to get notified when that's up. And if you know any friends who you think might enjoy this video, remember to share it with them. It really helps out the channel, and they might get to enjoy content they otherwise might have missed out on. Thanks for watching.